Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Nasma Abdul Muhsin and this is Maldives Today. We're here tonight with the Ambassador of Maldives to Sri Lanka, MOHAMED HUSSAIN SHAREEF, as we attempt to break down the current political situation in the country. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is a critical juncture in the Maldivian democratic life. A state of emergency has been declared in the country. We are witnessing numerous steps being taken to ensure national security. However, for the outsider who is unfamiliar to the situation, these actions might seem unwarranted. What justified the need for declaration of state of emergency?
Thank you. Firstly, as you've rightly pointed out, we are faced with a situation which is unprecedented and one which honestly we did not foresee. We're not yet certain whether it's a judicial coup, as is what the hashtags going around labeling it, but we know is that what we know for certain is that it was planned meticulously in advance, and there were a number of actors, and what was alarming was that it was not just the opposition. If it was just the opposition who were the main actors behind planning or plotting the actions that we saw, or the developments that we witnessed on the first, you could simply label it as a political development and move on. But the very fact that the judiciary were involved, and not just any appellate of the judiciary, was the Supreme Court itself, was we now know party to this plan, and that a number of very serious issues have now come to light, including bribery, attempts at reversing beyond the very much outside of the powers, which is actually extensive, of the Supreme Court, as is the case in any country, and an attempt to then follow it up by curtailing the authority or the powers of the only check and balance, or the appellate to the Supreme Court, which is the Judicial Services Commission, and the fact that more than one former president was involved. So unless these measures were taken, unless a state of emergency was declared when it was, and a number of related steps were taken, it would have plunged the country into further chaos and really honestly threatened peace and security and stability of the country. Because although we have a state of emergency at the moment, what is striking, as you and I are residents of Mali, we would know, is that normal life proceeds as it did before the declaration, because it was targeted, and specific articles of the Constitution were clearly identified and withheld for the period of 15 days, and it was all very directly, it was designed to open the avenue for an investigation into what we think is serious wrongdoing on the part of not just more than one a justice of the Supreme Court, as well as the Chief Justice himself, but also a former president, a senior member of the judicial administration, and so forth. So we now know that money changed hands, large sums of money changed hands. We know that there were local and external actors involved as well. So this is a very, very serious issue that we're facing. So the current steps were necessary, and we don't take these steps lightly in the Maldives, because we are always mindful, in spite of the fact that over the past 10 years or more we've had various junctures where political difficulties. We faced political difficulties, but Maldivians always move beyond, and we move on. We find a local solution to these problems, and normalcy is restored in a relatively short period. But this was, I think, unprecedented even by our very volatile political history. Nothing of the sort has happened before, so it was warranted. But as I said, we don't take these steps lightly because, of course, we depend on tourism. And what we want to also tell our external stakeholders and viewers is that life proceeds in Male, the airport and resorts and so on, as normal. The only people who are affected by the state of emergency are those who are under investigation, and that's a handful. And the investigation's now proceeding. We actually had a police press briefing this evening with further information, and as we feared, I would say a lot of evidence has been unearthed, and not just witness statements, but material evidence, and also some of the monies that I referred to has also been found. So the investigation's proceeding at breakneck speed because we don't want the status quo to stay for very much longer, because, as I said, we are mindful of the image of the country, and what has always been a strength of the Maldives, which is that we're a peaceful shore, tranquility, security and safety, especially for our visitors. So I'm hopeful that we can move beyond this in a relatively short period of time. And as you know, one of the articles that was withheld has since been lifted as well. So as we go along, as the need no longer exists for a particular measure, it will be lifted. But it's a serious issue, and it's being attended to in that same spirit, and a serious investigation is going on, and those under investigation are very, very senior people.
Well, we are a country that banks heavily on foreign investment and foreign partnerships for trade and development. We saw the foreign minister today. We saw the foreign minister invite our foreign development partners to come and assess the situation in the country. How confident is the government that this political crisis will not have an adverse effect on the country's economy and foreign investments?
Well, it's not designed solely for the investor, it's also for our stakeholders. So that invitation also is open to diplomatic stakeholders, whether it be bilateral or multilateral. What we know is, what we're confident of is that they will then see what we see now on the ground, which is that life is proceeding here in the capital, particularly as it did before. There's no excess presence of the police, and with barricades, and if there's relatively free movement in the city, there's no curfew. People are going about their normal lives. Business is proceeding as usual. Shops are open, schools are open. In fact, sports events are going ahead as well. What we know from previous experience is that quite often, unfortunately, a lot of observers, a lot of stakeholders are taken in by some of the PR that comes out of the opposition. And as usual, that's, in short, always an exaggeration of and at times ludicrous. So the picture that they painted to these observers who are abroad is likely to be very skewed. So we are hoping that if they're here on the ground in person, meeting us, meeting the ordinary people, walking around the streets of Mali, they're going to get a sense of the situation, that it is not affecting the daily lives of the people, and that the people are really, in some ways, largely oblivious to the scale of the event. Depending on which side of the political domain you're on, you are probably reading it on social media and taking a keen interest, because this is a very partisan political society that we live in. with two very large political parties. But nevertheless, whether you're a supporter of the opposition or the ruling party, you're going about your normal lives as you've always done, and that's what we want people to know. So, all the travel advisories, particularly, unwarranted. Because there's no curfew, tourists are coming to Male, they do their excursions as they used to. The airport's chock-a-block still full. The resorts are operating as normal as well. So, as I said, except for a handful of individuals who we know orchestrated these very serious actions, everybody else is pretty much going ahead their lives as normal. So by inviting them to come and witness, to meet us, to be here on the ground, much of the misconception that they probably had based on the numerous press releases that the opposition would be churning out, which, as I said, is likely to be totally baseless and very much exaggerated. With so many skewed facts, it would be very difficult for us to dissect each one and respond or rebut to each one of them, because there will be 101 misrepresentations in one press release that I know from my experience. So the easiest way and the most effective way to get our message across is by asking our partners to come here and make an independent assessment themselves, without depending on what they say or what we say, to make, to take stock of what's happening here and the way forward as well.
One issue that almost always overshadows any political disturbance in Maldives is the threat of foreign interference. We are a country that takes pride in our sovereignty, and almost all Maldivian governments, current and former, have stressed on the importance of ensuring that there is no foreign interference in domestic matters. However, some are of the opinion that right now we are at a stage where foreign intervention is necessary. Do you agree?
No, absolutely not. It's not been a hard and fast rule across the political domain. On the contrary, we've always seen the opposition, the main opposition party, and particularly the former president, that is former President Nasheed, is always over anxious to have foreign interference in our affairs. And this is not just today. He has a catalogue history of either, well, basically, even when he was in office, he would his foreign policy was riddled with these sort of preferences, and ironically the preferences do change as well. But we went from being a champion in non-alignment to having strategic partnerships with various countries, but at the same time having a foreign policy that was embraced internationally as being responsible. For a small country, we've always stood proud, bilaterally, multilaterally, as a very responsible partner of the international community, member of the international community, and we'd always punch above our weight. But Nasheed is basically outgo as far as saying is ready to be a puppet of anyone who is ready to do his bidding, just for the sake of coming to office. Now, if you recall, when he resigned in 2012, or the protests that went ahead before that, when we were in the opposition, at no point did we ever call for international interference or neighboring country to invade the country or have a military presence. I mean, these were no-nos. These are things that we, as a responsible political party, would never ever do, and we did not. He basically created the scenario himself where serious. It's a serious issue. He abducted a judge. Period. Now, what's ironic is that the Supreme Court ruling of the first is basically asking the state to release him. Period. Did he not abduct a judge? No, they actually went through the entire process of the lower courts, the High Court, the Supreme Court itself, was found guilty and was serving sentence, and then of course is now a fugitive. It's the same for former Vice President Adib. But my point here is that how is this classification of them being political prisoners? It's very hard for us to take, you know, well, it's not the case really, because Nasheed, number one, well, former president, but broke the law. Adib, basically, in short, he tried to assassinate the president, and there are serious corruption allegations against him as well, and he's serving sentence. There's a third, in the case of Mr. Qasim, you're talking about tax evasion and fraud amounting to tens of millions, of dollars. These are serious issues, and the fact that they're politicians doesn't make them political prisoners. That we do not buy into that argument. But at no point in our political history, as I said, in contemporary political history, even in times of political unrest or disagreement, did we ever invite a foreign power to come and invade the Maldives, or come to the Maldives with their, you know, so the gunboat diplomacy, if you like, is a thing of the previous century. It doesn't work today. We're a responsible member of the international community. We're not a microstate. We're a fully fledged independent country, and have been so for the past 52 years. And honestly, it comes about because of one man's hunger for power, and he knows he lost the election in 2013. Everybody knows it. There were observers here. He lost it fair and square, and the allegations or the issues that he faced were dated from before that. Yet he ran in the election and he lost. So I don't understand why one man's one megalomaniac should be holding a country hostage. He held a judge hostage, but it's not agreeable that he should hold a country hostage as well. And yes, he has a history of inviting undue foreign pressure or undue foreign involvement in our domestic affairs, which is not across the board. We've never done that, and we never will, because anyone with the best interest of the country at heart will not tread those lines or overstep the boundaries. We won't, for sure, but he would gladly do it. He's done it before, he's doing it again, and he probably will continue to do that.
Well, one of the important problems that have been dug up during this period since the February 1st Supreme Court ruling are allegations of deep-rooted corruption. High-profile individuals, like you mentioned earlier, including a former president, a chief justice, a Supreme Court judge, they are in custody on charges of corruption and attempted coup, among others. How does the government plan to curb corruption in the country?
Well, firstly, unfortunately, we saw the ugly head of corruption in the parliament, and we've known this has been the case for a while, haven't we? Because flow crossing is allowed in the Maldives. So this business of MPs, seeking the allegiance of X number of MPs for a price is something, unfortunately, that has riddled our legislature for many years. It's very difficult to resolve, because it's a difficult situation, because a number of business tycoons run for parliament, and they get elected because, of course, their campaign budgets are more lavish than others. So they get into parliament, and what they do is what we've seen Mr. Qasim do time and again, which is to make certain arrangements with the government of the day to forego taxes that he has to pay, dues that he has to pay to the Inland Revenue for his various businesses. And this is where the corruption and the bribery really of officials start, and there's a long history of this. But today we've come to another level where we know now that, you know, when former presidents are involved in bribing not just MPs, but we're talking about judges now, then it's a very, very serious issue, because we have full separation of powers in our constitution, and the Supreme Court we always held in the highest regard, and the danger here, particularly before the emergency, was that I couldn't even talk about this, because I'd have contempt of court slapped against me for even saying Supreme Court, you know, in the wrong tone. I'd probably be slapped a jail sentence for that, and that was how much power the Supreme Court had. And when not all, but some of the judges there decide that they can overturn without any evidence and without any appeal on the part of anybody sentences of serious charges and serious sentences against very senior officials, and it was also a selective job, as you know. Certain people in a particular case would have been highlighted, and others were not on the list of people who, I think it was a list of 9 people, but if you look at the particular cases, there were others who were involved in the same cases as well. For example, the case that Nasheed faced, there was the former defense minister as well, who continues to serve sentence, but his name wasn't on the list. It's the same with Adib and others. So we know that the motive was very different. And this was deliberated, this was designed, and we now know that the planning was so meticulous that they actually assumed that the president would be abroad on that day. I don't think a lot of people know this, but the president had a planned visit overseas, private visit overseas, on a family matter, and the First Lady was abroad, but the president, because of his work schedule, had not left the country and was still in the country when this happened. So those who planned this also assumed that President Yamin would not be in the country at that point. Not only did they plan that he would not be in the country, he would have probably been in the air, flying at that point, which would incapacitate his ability as a president to take immediate decisions. So this was designed in that, you know, to that detail, that finer detail. But as luck would have it, and the grace of God, it didn't work out, and it was, you know, the president was here, and we were able to take swift action to de-escalate or to foil the plot.
Well, if the events of that have unfolded since the 1st of February has taught us anything, it is that in fact the 3 powers of the state are autonomous, are independent, and can be very independent. However, the Maldivian constitution stipulates that the powers of the state be autonomous yet complementary.
Yes.
Do you believe this could have a lasting impact, this situation, this development could have a lasting impact on the democratic foundation this country is being built on?
Oh, no question. The minute you have a Chief Justice involved in this sort of scandal, you know, it immediately erodes as I said, the high regard and respect that we had for the institution as a whole. So one individual, through his action or his short-sighted personal, you know, for personal gains, what you do can affect the institution, and it's no different for the presidency. I mean, Nasheed made a mockery of the institution of president, and since then every president, we've had 2 presidents since then, has had to really reinvent themselves as the head of state. And again, it's the same with Parliament. When you have MPs crossing the floor for the highest bid, you know, we've seen that. I'll give you an example. The current Majlis started with an overwhelming majority from the public for our party. We had nearly 2/3, in fact, or more of seats in Parliament, and that was a mandate that was given to us by the public. And we saw, you know, MPs cross the floor from our side to theirs, individually and in groups at various junctures, and you now have a situation where they probably have more seats than us as well. How did we come to that? So here's the irony. The casual observer or the naive observer abroad might think, oh, okay, the government. But here's the fun part: they have the money, so they play. It's a game of Russian roulette for them. But it's money that's changing hands. Otherwise, we would have a majority, wouldn't we? Here's the irony: our MPs are taken to their side. They have the bank balances to go and bribe whoever they need to bribe to get the job done. We know that they attempted numerous occasions to try and impeach the president or impeach the speaker and so on through Parliament, but they even came very close once, but just didn't have the numbers to get it done. So initially the focus was on the legislature, and once they realized that that was not going to happen, it was the judiciary. Now, their entire democratic credentials can be brought in question by one simple fact. We have elections scheduled in 6 months' time. Why are they not ready to go to the polls and allow the people to decide? If they had such a big following, part of the reason why there is peace and security and normalcy in Mali at the moment is because the actual public support for the opposition is so thin now that they cannot amass a crowd. And they've attempted every night since the first. They tried their level best to try and have a street presence. Again, more so for the visual, to go abroad to the naive diplomat abroad who can be swayed. But they couldn't do that, simply because they just don't have the support of the public. And they know what we know, that at the polls, it doesn't matter who their candidate is, they were going to face defeat. But we don't have to apologize to them for their own doings. In fact, the very reason why the opposition have seen their support base erode is because of Nasheed. No other reason. Had he actually paved the way within his own party to allow for younger politicians to come up and take up positions of responsibility, for example, has he even bothered to have an internal election? They've never had an internal election in the entire history of the main opposition party. Never. So the fact that we don't have a strong opposition in the country is no fault of ours as a government or a ruling party. It's self-inflicted, and in fact it is the arrogance and the megalomania of one man in the opposition who first and foremost has led to the erosion of their own support, and as a result the desperation and then these illegal actions that we've seen in recent days.
Thank you for sparing some time from your busy schedule to be with us.
Nasma, thank you very much for having me on the show. Thank you.
This is Nasma Abdul Hussain signing off, hoping to see you again to discuss yet another issue of national importance. Have a pleasant day.